Greetings, my name is Carl Zulauf. I'm a professor of agricultural economics at Ohio State University. I am here to discuss with you the crop program decisions that you will need to make under the 2014 Farm Bill. Let us now take a look at some of these decisions and some of the things that you will need to consider. First, I'd like to begin by reviewing the decisions that you need to make. There will be three of them. There is a yield update decision that can be made through February 27, 2015. There is a base acre reallocation decision that can be made again through February 27, 2015. And there is a program choice decision with its final date being March 31st, 2015. So there is some overlap on the time for these decisions, but the program choice decision has to be made have to be made at a later date than either the base acre allocation decision and the yield update decision. I want to talk about each one of these decisions. I will start by talking about the yield update decision. This is one that every FSA farm owner should actively do, even though you don't necessarily have to do it. There is a default option here. You may keep your current counter-cyclical program yields. This is the default option. Or you may use another option, which is 90% of a simple average for the years 2008 through 2012. And you will want to look at these options and compare them. The word simple has meaning in this particular case because you include all years in the calculation, including low yield years, so there's no discarding of either high yields or low yields in this calculation, and it only uses the years for which there is a planted acre on that particular FSA farm, and we are talking about the FSA farm, not a crop production farm. So this is an FSA farm number. The elections are made on a crop-by-crop basis for each of the individuals, that each of the individual FSA farms that you have. And so you may update the crop acres for some crops and not for other crops. The decision is pretty straightforward, but the updated yields may be lower, and there's some other nuances to this decision that I want to discuss with you, and in particular through the use of an example. This is simply an example that's created. It represents no individual particular farm. You can see that you have yields per planted acre in different situations, and I want to go through each one of those situations. This is a crop that was planted in 2008, but there is no evidence for that particular year. And so that year will have what's called a substitute yield that is used for it, and the substitute yield is 75% of the 2008 through 2012 county average yield. So if there's any year for which you do not have the evidence or cannot get the evidence, the yield that will go into the update calculation would be 75% of the 2008 through 2012 county average yield. In all other years, this is a minimum yield. For example, in this particular situation, if you look at the year 2012, the actual yield that the farmer had in this situation was 100 bushels an acre. And this is per planted acre, not on a harvested acre basis, and that is less than the 112 substitute yield. And so the yield that would be used that year is the substitute yield of 112, not the 100 bushel that was actually achieved that year. So there is this playoff that occurs between this substitute yield and the actual yield that on the planted acres. If there was no planted acres during that year to that crop, and that year is not included in the calculation. This is the notion of a simple average. So you literally could have only 1 year in the 2008 through 2012 period that you planted to a crop, and that would be the yield that you could have as the update. So there are lots of ways that you could actually end up with a smaller yield than what your current countercyclical yield, and the only way that you can do that is actually to use to do the calculations, to use one of the program calculators that exist out there, and there are several that are available to do this. The other thing that I would point out that is a really important consideration in this decision is FSA will allow you to self-report your yields, and then they will come in and randomly select people to be checked for the verification of those yields. And so when you're reporting yields for a year, or when you're reporting the production that will be used to calculate the yields for that year, you need to consider whether you can verify those yields should you be selected for verification purposes by the Farm Service Agency or FSA. And that's an important consideration. If you can't verify the yields, then you will basically have no planted evidence for that year. If you cannot provide documentation or decide that you cannot provide documentation, and the yield for that year would then become 75% of the county average yield or the replacement yield. So it is possible, if you have no way of verifying or choose not to verify the yields, you will always have the 75% of the county average yield, and so that becomes sort of a minimum yield, and that yield may become the yield that actually is higher than your current yield. So one of the things to possibly consider is that even though I may not be able to verify my yields, that doesn't mean that your yield might not necessarily go up because of the update decision and because of the existence of the substitute yield. This completes the discussion of the Farm Program Yield Update decision, and we will now move on to another discussion.